We're gonna build a two-family house here. Kai said this in a bossy tone.
A two-family house?
Yeah, that's right. I tore down the old house, so now I'm broke. You're gonna have to cover the construction costs. My mother-in-law nodded in satisfaction. I was stunned by Kai's words, but after collecting my thoughts, I couldn't help but burst out laughing.
That's so funny. What's so funny all of a sudden? What's so hilarious?
Kai and my mother-in-law asked, looking a bit panicked by my uncontrollable laughter. Maybe they thought I'd cry and be devastated. They seemed confused because my reaction wasn't what they expected. After I finished laughing, I finally spoke. Didn't you guys hear? And at that moment, while I was laughing, Kai and my mother-in-law's faces fell into despair. My name is Maria. I grew up with a regular office worker dad and a stay-at-home mom. And I was the middle child between my older and younger brothers. We lived in rural Nebraska, so my brothers and I spent our childhood running around the hills and fields. Maybe that's why, though it's a bit self-indulgent to say, I have a bit of a tomboy personality.
Maria's a bit too energetic. I wonder if she'll ever find a husband.
My mom would worry about my constant scrapes from fights or broken bones from falling out of trees. I was such a wild child. Because of that, even as an adult, my mom's prediction seemed accurate. I hadn't found a good match and sometimes thought I'd be alone forever. However, seeing my situation, my boss arranged a blind date for me. That's how I met my husband, Kai. Kai lived with his single mother. He had a mature way of thinking and cherished his mother, which convinced me that marrying him would make me happy. So, I accepted Kai's proposal and we got married. We had planned to live together after marriage, but circumstances forced us to live apart. Kai was living in a small apartment complex at the time, and it was way too cramped for me to move in. Finding a bigger house was tough because there were hardly any rentals available in rural areas. So, my mother-in-law had to live alone in the apartment, and Kai and I finally found a 3-bedroom apartment near her place to start our married life.
We need to buy a house soon so we can live with Mom. Yes, even if she's okay now, it must be tough for her to live alone.
I knew Kai cared deeply about his mom. So, I genuinely wanted to take good care of her too. But we couldn't immediately solve the living situation. About 6 months into our marriage, we discovered that I was pregnant. My parents, my brothers, and even my mother-in-law were thrilled. Everyone eagerly awaited the baby's arrival. 10 months later, we had a healthy baby girl. We named her Natalie. I went back to my parents' place for about a month, then returned home. That's when our life as a family of 3 started. It was around that time my mother-in-law began to harass me a little. Mostly with snide remarks.
If you guys can live together as 3, I should have just moved in with you from the start.
Even though Kai had talked to her when we were choosing a house, she began to make these sarcastic, nasty comments. I could only respond with a strained smile. My mother-in-law's troublesome behavior wasn't limited to those snide remarks. After I returned home, she started coming over to our place every day and stayed from morning till evening. Maybe she came to see Natalie. But because of that, I couldn't escape her snide comments. When I was taking care of Natalie, she would say things like, "It would have been better if you were a boy, you know," to our 1-month-old daughter.
You better give her a little brother soon.
I finally had to say something to her.
We're not thinking about a second child yet. Natalie was just born.
I'm not talking to you. I'm talking to Natalie. Right? Even though she said that, it was obvious those words were aimed at me. With unfamiliar child-rearing and housework, plus being sleep-deprived, it was honestly exhausting to deal with my mother-in-law every day. After days of this, I finally decided to talk to Kai.
Kai, it's about your mom. What about her?
Kai knew his mom came over every day. But he probably had no idea how much it was bothering me. I hesitated but believed that since Kai cares about his mom, he'd consider my feelings too. I started to speak. Her coming over every day is a problem. A problem.
Mom doesn't have anyone to talk to and she's lonely. That might be, but Natalie and I have our own schedules. Having her here every day is a lot.
I couldn't bring myself to tell him about the snide remarks. I didn't want to make his mom the villain. I hoped Kai would understand how I felt, but judging by his expression, it seemed my hopes were in vain.
You stayed at your parents' and showed them Natalie's face, right? Are you saying my mom can't come see her?
As expected, Kai accused me in an angry tone.
My stay at my parents' was for recovery. My mom helped me. But your mom even makes me prepare lunch for her. What's the big deal about lunch? That's not a problem.
Kai seemed to think that my being 1 month postpartum and waking up multiple times a night was no big deal. I wanted my husband, Kai, to support me physically and emotionally, but his reaction was deeply disappointing. That wasn't the end of it. Kai told his mom what I had said. The next day, when she came over, the first thing she said to me was,
"You told Kai not to let me come over?" "I didn't say don't come. I just said every day is too much." "Really, who do you think you're living off of?"
After that, my mother-in-law got even harsher towards me. Even though she had gone through childbirth herself, it seemed she couldn't understand how hard it was for me. Thinking back, I should have escaped to my parents' house at this point, but I didn't even have the energy to think that far. I just endured the daily difficulties and my mother-in-law's snide remarks. However, thanks to my naturally sunny disposition and tomboyish personality, I never completely broke down. After some time postpartum, as my mental state stabilized, I became better at letting her snide remarks roll off me. Once I clearly recognized my dislike for my mother-in-law, I also got better at handling her. When she asked, "Is there no lunch today?" I started to respond clearly if it was too much trouble for me to prepare it, saying, "There's leftover baby food. If you don't want that, please feel free to go home and eat." She didn't like that even more, though. When Natalie turned 3, I went back to work. I had left my job when I got married and hadn't planned to work for a while, but Kai's salary wasn't increasing much, and I had to be frugal. I wanted to earn a little extra, worrying that we might not be able to give Natalie a good education. Despite dealing with constant colds and infections from daycare, I managed to juggle work, house chores, and parenting on my own. Naturally, this reduced the frequency of my meetings with my mother-in-law. Even though it was physically exhausting, not having to listen to her snide remarks made me surprisingly more energetic. The mental impact seemed larger than I had thought. However, Kai didn't like this change.
"Do you really need to work and leave Mom on her own?"
Kai kept asking me to quit my job. But I didn't want to be forced to save money or deal with my mother-in-law's stress. I explained my legitimate reasons for working and refused to quit. One day, Kai took the ultimate step against me. He stole my cash and credit card.
"No matter how much you work, I'll manage it. Since you can't use it freely anyway, use your time to take care of Mom."
I was stunned. Even if he didn't want his mother to be alone, this was crossing a line. Despite my protests to Kai, the bank book never came back. Still, I continued working and thought about how to prevent my salary from being taken. I knew that if I changed my salary account, it would be found out and taken again. So, I talked to my company and arranged to receive part of my salary in cash. Kai was satisfied with controlling the salary account and didn't suspect I was getting money elsewhere. I decided to save the cash for Natalie and kept the money hidden. Thanks to that, by the time Natalie graduated from high school, I had saved a good amount of money. That's how our family lived. Kai's salary never increased much, and despite our saving efforts, we couldn't save a lot. The plan to buy a house and live with my mother-in-law had yet to come true, but I felt that might have been for the best. Now, Natalie is going to college, and with her tuition and living expenses, moving in together is still far off, and I'm relieved about that. But then one day, something shocking happened to me. My mother passed away, and just a few months later, my father did too. My parents, who had been so close, died from different illnesses in quick succession. Though I thought they had gone to heaven together, the shock and sense of loss I felt was immense.
It's tough on us left behind when they both go so close together.
My brother and sister felt the same way. The three of us remembered our parents.
They're probably scolding each other in heaven, like, why'd you come so soon?
Definitely. I can totally see that.
Yeah. But we've gotta figure out what to do with the house. We can't just leave it as it is.
As my brother said, our parents' beloved home had become vacant. Both my brother and sister were married with their own homes, and the house itself was already in poor condition.
Right. If we leave it like this, it'll affect the neighborhood and could become a safety issue.
We discussed it, but since it was between the funerals, we didn't have much time. We agreed that since I lived closest, I'd start clearing it out, and we'd decide what to do with the house after that. But things didn't go as planned. When I returned to the house for the first time after the funerals, it was gone.
What's going on?
I quickly contacted my brother and sister. They were speechless when they heard the house was gone. Judging by their reactions, neither of them had arranged for it to be demolished. As I stood there in shock, looking at the empty lot where the house had been, I heard footsteps behind me.
Maria, you're here.
It was Kai.
Oh, did you come to help?
And my mother-in-law. Why were the two of them here? I slowly turned my gaze to them.
Help! What do you mean? Isn't it obvious?
Clearing up.
Clearing up? Kai, did you tear down my house?
Yeah.
We're gonna build a two-family house here.
Kai said this with an air of authority.
A two-family house?
Yep.
Since I had it torn down, I'm broke now, so you're gonna have to cover the construction costs. Oh, and you can ask your brother and sister to pitch in since we tore down the house for you.
My mother-in-law nodded in satisfaction. I was dumbfounded by Kai's statement. I couldn't comprehend his outrageous behavior, but as I slowly gathered my thoughts, I couldn't help but burst out laughing.
That's so funny. What's so funny all of a sudden? What's so funny?
Kai and my mother-in-law asked, looking a bit panicked by my uncontrollable laughter. Maybe they thought I'd cry and be devastated. They seemed confused because my reaction wasn't what they expected. After I finished laughing, I finally spoke.
Didn't you guys hear? You were right next to us when my siblings and I were talking.
Huh?
Oh, yeah, we heard. That's why we went ahead and tore it down for you. It would have been a waste to leave it vacant. The house was old, but the lot is big.
Though they answered my question, I was certain they hadn't really listened. At the funeral, my siblings and I had discussed what to do with our parents' house. Kai and my mother-in-law were right next to me, but they must have only heard what suited them and then acted recklessly. I couldn't stop laughing, imagining the two of them secretly plotting.
You idiots. The truth is, you can't build a house here anymore. There's no way you could put up a two-family house. What? What do you mean?
Kai looked bewildered when I dropped the bombshell.
Exactly what I said. That's nonsense. There was a house standing here before, wasn't there?
My mother-in-law was also in a panic. I raised an eyebrow and smiled at them.
Yes, there was a house here before. But now, because of changes in the building codes, you can't build anything here. This was a non-rebuildable property.
Kai and my mother-in-law turned pale at my words.
What do you mean by non-rebuildable? Does that mean demolishing the house was pointless?
They finally seemed to grasp the situation. I answered Kai's frantic question with a smile.
It wasn't pointless. I always thought we'd have to tear it down eventually. Thanks for doing it.
Even though I was upset about the house being demolished without permission, I gave them my most sarcastic smile and words. Sooner or later, we would have had to do it. I wasn't ready for it, but I decided to see it as a blessing in disguise. However, contrary to my smile, Kai and my mother-in-law started losing it.
You didn't tell us that. This is a scam. How could you keep something so important a secret?
Their reaction was completely absurd. But the more they freaked out, the funnier I found it. They had no right to complain since they did the demolition without my consent, but they seemed oblivious to that fact.
We went to all this trouble to demolish it. Was it wasted money? Yeah. Your siblings should cover the demolition cost. It was $120,000.
My eyes widened at the amount.
$120,000? No way it cost that much. I didn't tell you because you just oppose it. So, I found a company that would demolish it without needing any signatures.
Kai said this, and I was just dumbfounded. If he had hired a legitimate demolition company, they'd need signatures from me, my brother, and my sister, as we were our father's heirs and the legal owners of the house. But since he thought we'd object, he went to some shady company that didn't need our approval. It was likely some kind of criminal organization. Because of this, the demolition cost way more than the usual $60,000 for our house, $120,000. I don't know why he sounded so arrogant, but even after explaining this, Kai kept acting like he was in the right.
Oh, I see. That was a waste of money. What? I'm not paying the demolition cost.
Thanks for the effort, though. I firmly told Kai and my mother-in-law again that I wasn't paying for the demolition.
What are we gonna do, Kai? We were supposed to have our two-family house.
My mother-in-law, confused, blamed Kai, but there was nothing he could do. I left them both there and walked away. Since there was no house to clean up anymore, I didn't need to be there. When I got home, I calmly contacted my brother and sister.
It was Kai and his mother who did this. I'm really sorry.
After apologizing, I explained how they'd used a shady company and spent $120,000. Both of them were appalled by Kai and his mother's actions, but they said, well, at least now we don't have to worry about it anymore. That's a bit of luck. Normally, we'd be shocked about losing our family home like this. But I was grateful for their kindness, reassuring me so I wouldn't feel responsible. This made me determined to give Kai and his mother a shock greater than what we had suffered. After talking with my siblings, Kai and my mother-in-law returned to our house.
Maria, we need to talk,
Kai said, suddenly serious. I wasn't eager, but I thought maybe he'd apologize, so I reluctantly agreed to talk. The three of us sat down at the table, and Kai started speaking.
The thing is, in 3 months, Mom has to leave her apartment.
What?
We planned to live in the two-family house, but since we can't do that because of you, she'll be moving in here.
I was speechless. Apparently, my mother-in-law had already started the process of leaving her apartment. Starting the move-out process even before the demolition is just too unrealistic.
With Natalie gone, there's room for just me here, right? It's your fault anyway, so you can't refuse.
My mother-in-law was fully set on moving in. Yes, our household had gone from 3 to 2 since Natalie started living on her own for college. But I had no intention of living with my mother-in-law, and why it was supposedly my fault was beyond me.
All right then. Feel free. I'll move out.
I couldn't even bother to say anything else to them and just spat that out. My mother-in-law heard this and smiled as if she had one. Meanwhile, Kai just said wait, what, with his mouth hanging open.
Hold on, you're leaving? We can fit 3 people here. It's just a matter of swapping Natalie for Mom.
It was as if he didn't want me to go.
What are you talking about? No way.
I shut him down firmly. I had respected Kai's desire to take care of his mother and had put up with a lot. But I wasn't going to sacrifice myself any longer. If I started living with my mother-in-law, she'd certainly start with the snide remarks and treat me like a servant or slave, just like before. Our discussion went in circles. In the end, we didn't resolve anything, and the deadline for my mother-in-law's move-out was approaching. Since I hadn't heard anything, I assumed Kai had arranged another place for her. But one day, my mother-in-law showed up at our house with a ton of luggage.
I'll be staying here,
she said, grinning as she came in, which left me wide-eyed again. Kai glanced at me but quickly looked away. They were the kind of people who'd demolish a house without permission. Moving into my home without asking was no big deal for them. Honestly, I had anticipated this. Still holding on to a shred of hope that Kai might be reasonable, I hadn't asked or confronted him about his mother's living situation. But ultimately, Kai prioritized his mother over me. Completely fed up, I went to the bedroom, grabbed luggage as large as my mother-in-law's, and said,
"Well, I'm leaving then."
Kai immediately stood up at my words.
"Thanks for everything,"
I said, taking my packed bags towards the door.
"Oh, leaving, are you? Where to?" "You can stay here, but if you really want to go, I guess that's your choice,"
my mother-in-law said, smirking at me. Kai turned pale and said, "Wait, calm down for a second."
"Why don't you calm down? I trusted you, Kai. But you ignored my feelings. I'm done. I can't live with strangers."
Hearing my words, Kai finally seemed to realize his foolishness and sank to his knees, speechless. I left him there and walked out. I headed straight to the apartment where Natalie was living on her own. I had already explained the situation to Natalie. She had said, "You can always come to my place if things go wrong." I felt bad about imposing on my daughter, but I had no choice.
"I'm glad you're coming, Mom,"
Natalie said to me. Whether she meant it or not, I was genuinely happy to hear it. Since commuting from Natalie's place was tough, I arranged to work remotely and took care of the household chores, while Natalie was focused on her studies and part-time job. She also enjoyed hanging out with friends and seemed to be making the most of her college life. During our time living together, Kai contacted me several times. Most of his messages were about wanting me to come back.
"I realized how important you were after you left. I only took care of Mom for your sake. You said it was good to be someone who values family. If you leave me now, all my efforts will be in vain."
Kai sent these nauseating messages, blaming his actions on his supposed deep love for me, which only made me lose even more respect for him. Each time I got one of those emails, it was just exhausting.
"Why don't you just get a divorce? You don't get anything out of staying with him, do you?"
Natalie's words convinced me to finally decide to get a divorce. I picked up the divorce papers and returned home for the first time in a while. Since it was Kai's day off and my mother-in-law was usually home, I was sure they'd be there. Not wanting to have a conversation, I didn't call ahead and just went over.
"Kai, are you home?"
I asked through the intercom, and as expected, Kai rushed out to the front door. Seeing my face, he looked relieved and smiled. "You came back?" "Nope."
"I brought the divorce papers." "What? And what's that smell? I'm coming in."
Though Kai's face turned to one of despair, I was more concerned about the smell of rotting garbage that hit me the moment the door opened. I pushed past Kai and walked into the house. Inside was a living room that looked like a junkyard.
"Oh, you're back?"
My mother-in-law was casually sitting on the sofa, watching TV amidst the trash.
"There's a lot to do here. Why don't you start by taking out the garbage?"
Seeing me, she pointed to the piled-up trash bags. The rotting smell was indeed from the accumulated garbage.
"Why haven't you thrown it out properly? And even if you ask me to take it out now, it's not trash day today, so it's impossible,"
I retorted. She laughed. "Just leave it out there. They'll pick it up on trash day." I was appalled by her unreasonable response. I glared at Kai, who shrank back immediately.
"Leaving was the right decision. I'd have been turned into a servant here." "No, that's not. I'm not coming back."
I shoved the divorce papers towards him again. Kai started trembling as he looked at the papers.
But, the old house needed to be torn down anyway, right? It did need to be demolished. But having it torn down without permission isn't right. And I'm not going to be your slave." "But Mom and I are both terrible at housework."
I was appalled. He clearly intended to use me as a servant.
"Why don't you just hire a maid? You should have the money for that, right? You've been taking my salary and forcing me to save."
Kai replied, trying to defend himself.
"I don't have any money. We spent it all on the demolition. I don't believe you spent it all on the demolition, that's why I'm asking.
Kai started to say something but then clammed up. I was sure he was hiding something. Hearing our conversation, my mother-in-law, who had been speaking up until now, went silent. But she had a smug smile on her face. That's when it clicked.
Wait a minute, were you giving the money to your mother?
Kai looked guilty at my words. My mother-in-law spoke up as if it were the most natural thing.
Well, you had to send me some money, of course. How much? What? I asked how much you were giving her every month.
Kai shrank back at my yelling. He muttered.
I don't know exactly. Basically, Mom kept my paycheck and I just got an allowance.
I felt dizzy. Kai's salary hadn't been increasing. Or so I thought, but every raise had gone straight to his mother. No wonder he saw nothing wrong with taking my salary, too. He probably thought it was normal since his mother had done it to him. He must have had no doubts or guilt about it.
That's insane. Mother-in-law, didn't you think it was cruel to do that to your own son?
I lashed out at my mother-in-law in my anger. She retorted with a scowl.
Better than having it spent by a daughter-in-law.
I'm his mother.
Just because you're his mother doesn't mean you can do whatever you want. In fact, your constant interference is why Kai and I are having problems. You're blaming me? I did it for Kai's sake.
My mother-in-law shouted, her face red with anger.
Calm down.
Kai tried to intervene, but his voice was too weak to reach her.
I should never have let him marry someone like you.
My mother-in-law shrieked and threw a cushion at me. But at that moment, she lost her balance and slipped on the garbage scattered on the floor. With a loud scream, she fell heavily, crashing into the table and hitting her arm.
Ouch! Mom?
Kai looked horrified. I smirked at the scene. They could play their little parent-child drama all they wanted.
Make sure to file the divorce papers. Hey, now's not the time for that, okay? I'm in pain, and you're bringing this up now?
Kai and his mother started yelling hysterically again.
To me, nothing's more important right now than divorcing Kai.
I stood my ground. More complaints and insults flew at me, but I didn't have time to listen to them. Ignoring their outbursts, I left the house. That evening, Kai contacted me.
Mom broke her arm. It's tough for her, so please come back.
Then he started sobbing. Because his mother always coddled him, Kai ended up like this. I thought Kai cared about his mother before we married, but he was just a mama's boy who couldn't cut the cord.
I don't care. Please. I was really wrong. I'll apologize. What good is an apology? If you fix up my family home and get back all the money you gave to your mom, maybe I'll listen.
With that, I coldly cut off his pitiful plea. Now, Kai lives in the garbage-filled house, taking care of his mother. Her broken arm didn't heal properly, and she has lingering issues like numbness. Living on only instant meals in that squalor likely weakened her bones. As for the money Kai's mother had taken from him, it was spent on a maid while she lived alone, dining out, and other living expenses. In hindsight, her extravagant clothing should have been a clue. It's infuriating that some of the money Kai took from me was also spent by her. But after all their wasteful spending, there's probably very little left for Kai and his mother now.
Maria, you're the only one I can rely on. Please help me.
Kai's pleas for help from me are the biggest proof of that. Their poverty and suffering together must be severe. Naturally, I have no intention of helping them. Though Kai refused to divorce me until the end, my brother and sister supported me, and we got a lawyer involved. For the division of assets, the agreement was that the salary I'd been receiving in cash would remain mine.
Think about how badly you treated your wife.
The lawyer told Kai, and apparently, he cried.
And you too. It's time to let your son grow up and be independent.
The lawyer also scolded my mother-in-law. She was furious and yelled at the lawyer.
That pair will probably never change.
The lawyer who shared the story laughed as they said it. Now, Kai is living in a hoarder's house, taking care of his mother and her lingering issues, and they seem to be getting along well. I had repeatedly warned Kai not to let his mother control him. But he ignored my advice, and now he's facing the consequences. It's his own fault. Afterward, I moved out of Natalie's place and started living on my own. The apartment next to Natalie's became available. Living next door means I can support her if needed while still maintaining my privacy. No matter how close we are as parent and child, it's important to keep a healthy distance as she grows older. Though I'm living alone now, my life is more comfortable and independent than I expected. The money I earn is mine to keep. I still need to cover Natalie's tuition, but with the savings I've accumulated, I should be able to manage. Being single might bring its challenges. However, I no longer have anyone holding me back. I'm determined to move forward into the future on my own.